You have obtained your permanent residency. You're a green card holder, and you're not sure if you're ready to move to the United States, or you may have to be absent from the United States for some time. What you should do, how long you can be absent, what are the penalties, can you lose your permanent residency in the United States because of frequent or lengthy absences, how can you prevent this, and when will you qualify, or will you qualify for citizenship? Those are the questions that I will answer today in this video, and then we'll go through the chat section uh, of this video to answer as many questions as possible. Again, please comment, please ask your questions, and please subscribe, and please hit like. So once you become a permanent resident, the purpose of permanent residency of your green card is that you must live permanently in the United States. That does not mean you cannot travel outside of the United States. That does not mean that you cannot accept employment outside of the United States. So all of that is possible, but there are some rules. So you have to always permanently intend to permanently live in the United States. So your residency has to be in the United States. And each time you travel out of the United States, when you return, the Customs and Border Patrol will ask you what was the purpose of your trip, why were you absent from the US, even if it's just a trip for one day. And depending on your answers, they may decide that you have abandoned your permanent residency in the United States, you abandoned your green card in the US, and that you basically should surrender your permanent residency. But they cannot, number one, nobody's going to answer them. I mean, some people may, but typically people are not going to tell them, yes, I've abandoned my permanent residency, I actually live in another country, I'm using this green card just for the purpose of traveling. But how can they read your mind? So because they can't, they're asking these questions, but also there is a rule which says that if you are a green card holder and you travel outside of the US and spend during a single travel more than 180 days, which equals 6 months, outside of the US, then the officer is instructed that they should have a presumption that you have abandoned your permanent residency. So if it's more than 180 days during a single trip, you've been outside of the US, up until 12 months, the officer is instructed to inquire more about your absence from the US. And the rule is that you can overcome that presumption of abandonment of your permanent residency by demonstrating evidence that you maintained your close ties with the US, that you still intend to live in the US permanently, and that there were reasons for your absence, some compelling reasons. So what can you do to overcome that presumption? So if you've been absent from the US more than 180 days, more than 6 months, you should have with you a file of documents demonstrating that you maintain close ties. What kind of documents they could be? Number one, and the most important one, is you must have filed your tax returns for each year of your permanent residency in the United States. So I recommend, even if you're going to be traveling for a short period of time, if you're a permanent resident, if you have a green card, I recommend to have a file that contains your tax returns, copies of your tax returns, and specifically tax transcripts. It's very easy to pull those transcripts. You go to IRS website and you can easily pull all your transcripts for the years where you filed your tax returns. Now, if you're a permanent resident, but you have not filed your tax returns for some time or some years, don't be alarmed, don't panic. You can always do that. Get in touch with the CPA, get your taxes filed. Now, aside from the tax returns, what you can also do, you can carry with you evidence of other close ties. Maybe you own property in the United States. Maybe you lease property in the United States. Maybe you have a car, you have a bank account, you have credit cards, you have state ID, driver's license, you may have medical insurance or some other insurance. So there's plenty of evidence that you can accumulate and collect with you in that file each time you travel outside of the United States. If you're a permanent resident, you probably have heard of the difficulties people have, either because they're traveling too frequently or they have been absent for more than 6 months. Now, and these documents, this file, can overcome that presumption and these issues. Um, Now, there is a misconception that if you return to the United States before the 180 days expire, uh, basically every 6 months, then there's not going to be any questions about maintaining your green card and you're going to pass through the border easily. That's not true. Um, as I said, even if you travel outside of the US for even one day, the CBP officer upon your return will ask you about the purpose of your visit, of your absence. Uh, Secondly, if you travel too frequently or if you spend most of the year outside of the US, the same questions will come up. So they'll give you headaches. They'll give you a bunch of questions. They'll ask you, whether you live in the US or you live somewhere else, and so on and so forth. So as I said, carrying those documents help, but also there is one tool, there is one beautiful thing called Reentry permit that you can apply for. Reentry permit is a pre-authorization from the United States government to allow you as a permanent resident to be absent for up to 2 years. And nobody's going to be questioning you about the length of your absence. Now, they can still ask you a question about the purpose of your absence or things, what did you do in that country? Why are you there? And so on. But at least this 2 year reentry permit will prevent for the next 2 years any questions about the length of the absence because you already got the pre-authorization. And you don't have to visit US at all during those 2 years. Now, the reentry permit doesn't prohibit you from visiting the United States. You can come in and visit, especially if you want to maintain your residency for citizenship purposes down the road. But at least it's going to prevent any issues about the lengthy absences. The reentry permit requires you to be physically in the U.S. at the time of applying for it, and at the time when you have your biometrics, your fingerprinting appointment scheduled. So you have to be physically in the U.S. when you file the reentry permit application, and you have to be physically in the U.S. to attend your biometrics appointment. Usually it takes about a month or so for the biometrics from the time you file. So you don't have to be present in the US in between that time. So technically you can file for the entry permit while you're in the US briefly and then leave and then return when you have your biometrics scheduled. And if you're considering this, please contact our firm. We do this on a regular basis. We handle the entry permits. We prepare the package beforehand, and then once you arrive here, without any wait, we file it. So you have the contacts below. Please contact us. Now, if you're absent for more than 12 months, again, the reentry permit is going to help. But also, if you don't have a reentry permit, unless you have compelling reasons, such as unexpected illness or some urgent humanitarian reasons, then you may and you will probably lose your green card upon entry. They will still allow you into the US, but you may be called to immigration court for removal proceedings where you have to demonstrate that despite that lengthy absence, you did maintain your intent of returning into the US, but for some reason you couldn't, and so on. Like, for example, during the pandemic and so on and so forth. So again, to summarize, as a permanent resident, I always recommend to carry with you a file, no matter whether it's going to be a lengthy trip or not, containing your tax returns, a tax transcript, containing any other evidence of close ties to the U.S., such as insurance proof, property ownership, bank statements, credit card statements, store cards, whatever you have in the United States or whatever activities you show. And finally, if you're going to be traveling, if you know that you're going to be absent for quite some time, to apply for a reentry permit. Now, for qualifying for citizenship, the citizenship requires 5 years generally of continuous presence in the U.S., and half of which have to be physically spent in the U.S. And that physical presence, it doesn't have to be split or spread in those 5 years. It doesn't have to be in the beginning or end. it doesn't really matter. So as long as continuous presence, meaning absences for less than 6 months, uh, or if it's more than 6 months, again, those documents that the file can help you also overcome that for citizenship purposes. Or if you will have a reentry permit, then you will qualify for citizenship 4 years, 1 day after you return from your 2 year absence. So there is this rule that it's no longer 5 years, it's 4 years and 1 day.